remain curious. Um, you know, I think it gets so easy to try to pack a ton of like, one piece of advice for someone starting. Curiosity, to your point with your story with, the pitch year one, year two, it was your curiosity, from year one that got you back into year two. Right. And so like, just stay curious and like follow, almost like Scooby-Doo, like follow your nose as to where those next clues go, even if the door is closed. Like,
hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups to 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great guest on the podcast, Cameron Campbell, as I think you go more by Coach Cam, but Coach Cam, he went or started out working for the Texans in their marketing department, went and worked for, I think, public schools in urban Houston for a period of time, did a first business or a business doing sports training company, morphed that over into more of a school program, and now you're doing some hustles, public speaking business right now, doing some coaching. You wrote a book, and then you're head coach of a charter school in Houston. Is that about right?
About right, yeah. So you got like 99% of it right. So I transitioned out of coaching, formal coaching as it was in athletic a couple of years ago. But the others you hit on the head, man, and just try to stay busy.
All right. Well, plenty to stay busy. So I gave a real brief overview of kind of your journey and what you've done. But why don't you take us back to the beginning and let's hear a bit more about your journey.
Yeah, so my journey as an innovator really started for me. I guess as an entrepreneur started for me at like 9, 10 years old, and so really just tying a lawnmower to the back of a bicycle, and before landscape business was really as formal as we know it now, and just riding on the back of my bike and knocking on neighbors' doors to cut lawns, and the innovator bug, and kind of our conversation prior to going live was really always hardwired in me, right? And so, even from that, just the falling in love with iteration and tinker and modify. And so, that was the summer of third grade. And, by a week, I figured out that if I actually cut my neighbor's yard first and then rang the doorbell and said, "Hey, I cut your yard. You don't have to pay me if you don't want to, but I did it," right? Turned into, "Oh, thanks for cutting it. By the way, what else can you do? What else do you need? I can wash your car." So before you know it, I had like a bucket of soap tied to the lawnmower, tied to the back of the bicycle, and just falling in love with like the evolution
I
of
gotta
like.
stop just for a second. So you tied a lawnmower to the back of your bicycle? So how do you pull a lawnmower and not have it run into the back of you or lose control? And how does a lawnmower follow behind you as you're pedaling your bicycle?
Yes, I never said I was going fast. No, so I tie like a string, like so from like the back of the lawnmower, and maybe like a 2-foot string to like the back of to the back of my bike, and just like you remember as a kid, you used to like sit like you used to like I forgot the term we used to call it, but you have people like standing on the back pegs of your bike, and then so you like carry somebody. I forgot what we used to call it. Give somebody a jump, right? And so like you have somebody like on the back of your bike, and they're like standing like, well, at least where I'm from, like you'd stand, they lean on like your shoulders, and then maybe you like give somebody a jump, and they'd be like sitting on your handlebars. Like, no, you guys didn't do that out there.
I saw. Apparently I was the kid that was too risk averse, so I saw others do it, and yet I was the one. I had a hard enough time not crashing without tying things on or having other people ride on it. So I was just lucky just to stay up on my bike and not have any issues. So that was about the extent. But I do know what you're talking about. I have at least seen it on the movies, and I'm sure I've seen other people do it.
Man, that's like even telling that story is flashing me back. I used to like ride and like dribble my basketball. I was riding my bike, and at one point I was able like to cross over, not multiple times, but you could like ride, get your time in with your feet, and like cross over and bring the ball to the other side and ride. And Yeah, man. Just,
Your bicycle pedaling skills far surpass mine. So I don't even think I could dribble, let alone crossover, let alone have a lawnmower and a wagon with a bucket of everything to wash cars. So you mastered bicycling much more than I did. So now let's fast forward a little bit. So you did bicycling, kind of started that out as a kid. Now, how did that transition as you were growing up and doing that, starting to get into the business world?
The cool thing about that, Devin, and even again, like telling that story, like kind of makes you flash back from a nostalgic perspective. But what I realize now is what it taught me is like there really are no periods in life. There are only commas. And so like you take something you learn, add a comma, add something, learn something else, take a comma, learn something else. And so, even, that what that taught me into like grade school was like you can do more than one thing. And so I was a kid, like as an athlete, I lettered in 2 or 3 sports. I had a 9 to 5, or like I worked at a grocery store after school. I was a president of student organizations. I always enjoyed a full plate, and I always enjoyed not sort of rebranding myself, but like not being one specific person to everybody, right? And so like the student council guy for those people, the football player for these people, the FCA guy, the Christian athlete guy. Not that I was inauthentic in either of those roles, or any of those roles, but just understanding that, as an entrepreneur, you can serve many people, in many different ways.
No, I think that's good lessons to learn. So now, and so let's fast forward a little bit. So you go to I think college, or you went to university, studied for a bit. Doing that, what did you transition out? What did you go into? I think you'd mentioned you went to work for the Texans and marketing department, or how did you make that transition, or what led you down there?
Yeah, so I was also kind of to that point. I leveraged like every internship that I had, right? So like I played football, then in the winter I interned in the sports marketing department for basketball, right? So I began to get my toe wet into the internship space, and so I interned with the Texans first in the equipment department, which, coming as a former athlete, is extremely humbling. I mean, I was never the guy who threw dirty jock straps at the equipment guy's head, right? But you understand that there are people who do that, right? So to go from one side of the game to the other, and I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I think that so many young entrepreneurs think that you can't work in corporate America. Like I have to start off. I can't work for the man. If I can learn and make mistakes on somebody else's dime, and not that that's why you go into, starting a business or working for yourself, but, you're going to make so many mistakes, especially as you get into the workforce, right? And so, the cool thing about working for the Texans was, it was a safe place for me to make mistakes, but it was a deeply, deeply competitive work environment, right? So my colleagues, the cohort of, guys who, we came in together, you were scrappy, you were competing against each other, and you worked so many hours. And I think that was the beginning of the transition for me, into full-time entrepreneurship. Was like, man, I'm working 70 hours, 75 hours a week at minimum wage, and but I'm producing, either my colleagues are working 75 hours a week and they're producing 40 hours worth of production and getting paid the same, or I'm working 75 hours a week and producing 85 hours a week of production, and my checks like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense.
No, I get that. So now you do that. So in continuing down your journey, so you worked with the Texans for a period of time, did the marketing, say, hey, I'm going to leverage what I learned. I'm going to utilize that. I'm going to soak up all the pieces of knowledge. Then I think you mentioned that you went to public school after that, or kind of what was the motivation or the transition, or how did that occur for you?
Yeah, so I transitioned out of that, and that was as I was leaving the Texans. I was beginning to start my public speaking career, and so just again, being young, dumb, and not knowing much, can I step out on my own and do this public speaking thing? Which the answer was pretty quickly no, right? So it's like, yes, it's a hustle. It's something that you can add to your cap and be a resource, but you can't live off of that, especially first starting off. So I slid into the public school space, and and started my coaching career for a charter school, which was a really cool experience, serving some really, really at need kids and doing very purposeful work. And I transitioned out of that. You'll appreciate this story. So, um, uh, my first year, they hired a Spanish teacher who got caught in immigration and customs. She was coming from Mexico, and they weren't able to get her over. So they asked me to come like stand in her class the first day of school. Sure, no problem. That lasted like 2 weeks. So now you kind of get past the first day of school. You're not really teaching, and I have to actually teach you Spanish. Oh boy. So they never hired anyone, and I ended up teaching Spanish for like 2 sessions a day the entire year. And it was
I assume you knew Spanish, or did you learn a lot with the students, or how did that go?
Piquito, yo hablo Piquito. I'm from Houston, so of course I know like a little Spanish, right? But like I wouldn't teach your kid. I don't know you personally, but I wouldn't teach your kid Spanish. I wouldn't do that to you. You know what I mean? Like that's not in that kid's best interest. And that was kind of the second, awakening for me was like, in the corporate space, the machine will always move in the machine's best interest. Like they had a salary, they had budgeted resources to hire someone, right? But it was in their best interest to kind of double down, and I get it, but it's like we're talking about the welfare of kids here and what they need to be successful for their future. So that was when I really became disillusioned with working in the corporate space, and I started 5 Star Academy, and that quickly morphed from me training kids for $60 an hour, 50, whatever I was charging at the time, $50 an hour, for 2 or 3 hours a day in the sun, in the Texas sun, which, $150, mid 20s, like, cool. That's not a bad day until,
hey, that's not a bad day today. I'll take that any day. So,
right. Exactly. Right. And so it's until you take a step back and you get the Houston rain, and it's like, oh, well, it rained for 2 weeks. And so now, not only can I not train because it's raining, but now it has to dry up. It's dry, now it's humid. And so very quickly that morphed into, well, if instead of charging one kid $50 one-on-one, why don't I train small groups and charge them $30 per head and train 3 to 10 kids? So now I'm making $150 to $300 an hour. Well, that works, but then kids go back to school. So then everything declines. So now you've got to try to build up this preconditioning camp for basketball. And it kind of turned into like truly a hustle, as you described. And it's like, wait a minute, this is not sustainable. And so after maybe a year or so, I can't remember, but after a little while, you take a step back and you're like, I'm tired, I'm drained, it's hot outside. And so you look around, it's like, well, what? I've found a pain point. There's something here to this training thing, but how do I begin? And I didn't know much about scale at the time, but how do I automate it? Can I systemize it? So I began to plug, and I found that the best fit for that was for me to become a certified vendor. And I began to do contract work for school districts and ISDs and counties and nonprofits. And so instead of charging $50 an hour or $30 an hour, I could bill at 100 or $110 an hour and staff that with somebody else. And then, that was my first introduction to like passive income. And, again, it's always easier on the other side, but it was, the challenges of the trade-off of, can this person do a quality job? You're on edge from 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock waiting for your phone to ring. Like, this kid break his arm, or did this little boy touch this little girl? I mean, just all these little like, subtleties that you don't think about until you're in the moment. And it kind of, so that was a pretty unique experience for sure.
So as you, and I can see that's an interesting experience. And so now as we continue down your journey, so you started out in a marketing department with Texans, worked with public school for a period of time, then you transitioned to sports training that kind of morphed into an after school training program. And then it sounds like kind of in addition to that, or you're also building kind of your side hustles, which were public speaking and coaching, and then you wrote a book. So how do you focus, or where's your focus now, or are all of these competing interests? Do they all go together, or what are you kind of you saying, hey, this is now, as I've gained these experiences, as I've done these different things, this is now where I'm focused, or this is where I'm headed?
Exactly. And so you begin to add even more hustles to the plate and another coaching job. And you get to a point where it's like, wait a minute, this is not sustainable, one. But then two, none of these can scale with me as a bottleneck. And so as a natural creative, I began to kind of morph into understanding that if I could understand and learn process, that with process, I can scale. And so I wrote my first book last year, Alpha Redefined. And that was my first actual, I'd say, product space or experience. And, writing it obviously was a labor of love. But once I finished it, it was like, wow, this is a resource that I can pack in my garage, build a sales team around, even outsource to handle logistics and shipping. And so that kind of set me down the pathway of, trying to figure out what other products I could create to provide a great experience for people. And that I had a doozy of a time last winter in e-commerce, and the blessing in getting my butt kicked in e-commerce was as I came off of my book tour and kind of doing some promo around my book tour, I launched my online course, Win the First Quarter of Your Day. And the experiences and the setbacks that I had in e-commerce last winter allowed me to step over those mistakes as I began to ramp up this digital product. And so that's where I am now. So Win the First Quarter of Your Day, a playbook for wealth, health, and success. It's an online course kind of steeped in the best practices that I use not only in my life, but one of the cool things about writing this book was I was able to interview dozens of people, but over 12 millionaires and self-made entrepreneurs. And I was able to kind of aggregate all of that content and best practices of what they do to start their day.
No, I think that's awesome, and it certainly sounds like it'd be an insightful book, and be able to one that you can certainly learn a lot from. Well, as we start to head towards the end of the podcast, well, why don't we jump to? I always ask two questions towards the end of the podcast, so let's jump to those now. So the first question I always ask is, what was the worst business decision you ever made?
So the worst business decision I've ever made, So in 2015, again, side hustling, just kind of working, and I'm Ubering and I'm lifting, and it's not moving as well as or as fast as I like for it to. I'll say that. And so I'm sitting in front of a high-rise building, and I'm like waiting for the phone to kind of ping, So I think to myself, you don't drink coffee, but people who do is a Starbucks kind of like on the first floor. So I said, I wonder if I go into this high-rise building and just knock on doors of these office suites and just ask for folks, hey, I'm making a coffee run. Does anybody want Starbucks? And I'll charge you $3 to order whatever you want, bring your order back up. And when I say, Devin, that took off like you wouldn't believe. And so, within 2 weeks, I was literally like bogged down, just going up and down flights of, stories of buildings, taking people's Starbucks orders at 9 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock, and 2 o'clock, kind of that, kind of midday slump. And it worked well for me, right? And so I'm a very transparent person. I was looking for another penny so I could have two pennies to rub together at that time, right? Which I'm sure at some point every entrepreneur gets to that point. Absolutely. And it worked so well for me that I actually got a cease and desist from Starbucks. And really? So Starbucks was like, hey, thank you for, the support and patronage or whatever, but we're gonna have to ask you to stop. You can't deliver our hot drinks as hot as we would provide them to our customers, and you can't deliver our cold drinks as cold as we would deliver. So the cold drinks would kind of begin to melt the froth stuff on top, and I would have to order the hot drinks extra hot so they could remain warm by the time they got to the customer. So, the biggest mistake I'd say, and this is 2015 as a point of reference. So, Ubering and Lyft was super new, but there were no Postmates, Grubhub, Uber Eats, right? And so while I'm not going to like say I started that, or I'm definitely not taking credit for that, I say the biggest mistake was looking at that coffee concierge is what I called it, but looking at coffee concierge as a stopgap where I probably, with better perspective, could have launched that I could have systemized that and then sold that to Lord knows who, right? And so, that could have been my first, super big win. So I say that was probably my first mistake is, getting out when I probably should have stayed in a little bit longer.
And I think it is a hard decision to make, in the sense that sometimes a side hustle is just that. It is just a temporary job to make a little bit of money until you find the next big thing. And other times, side hustles are the things that become the big business, or the things that are become rewarding. I mean, I remember the first business I started was when I was in MBA school. I was doing my law degree and MBA, studying both of those. And I entered a business competition with a few other people, and that was just kind of, oh, this sounds like fun. I like to do startups, and I think this sounds like a thing. And, so we entered, and first year we entered and didn't go anywhere. Second year we entered, and it was one that I was passionate enough. I said, hey, this is enough more than just it's more of a better idea than just to do it as a business competition and let it go. And I was on the opposite side, to where all of the people on my team they were all graduating, they were all moving elsewhere, and they didn't have a very, very big vision of it. So I bought them all out, continued to build that company. It came to, I think I'd have to look, it's either 7 or 8 figure business now, but it all started from just a fun side hustle kind of business. But on the other side, you can say, hey, this is just that. It's a side hustle. It's not going anywhere. But I think making that balance or decision, is it something that it's my stopgap, or is it my next big thing, is I think always one that's a hard decision to make.
For sure.
So now we'll jump to the second question. So now, if you're talking to people who are just getting into startups or small businesses, just getting started, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Remain curious. I think it gets so easy to try to pack a ton of one piece of advice for someone starting. Curiosity, to your point with your story with, the pitch year 1, year 2, it was your curiosity, from year 1 that got you back into year 2, right? And so just stay curious and follow, almost like Scooby-Doo, follow your nose as to where those next clues go, even if the door is closed, like it did for me in e-commerce last winter. Last winter kicked my tail. I mean, I would not tell you how many thousands of dollars went down the drain, and I didn't have much to show for it. But then you fast forward, not even 6 months later, 7 months later, all of those losses, I've probably 3x'd, the money that I lost last winter, because I was able to fast track that into, producing an efficient and high quality product in this online course.
All right. No, I think that's good advice and good things for them to take away. So, well, as we wrap up, people want to get to, whether they want to read your book, they want to use your courses and find out more about your online resources, connect up with you, otherwise make a connection. What's the best way to reach out or connect with you?
So on social media, you can find me, Coach Cam Cares, on Instagram, on YouTube. I think I have a Facebook page. I mean, I don't know if people still use Facebook. On Twitter, Coach Cam Cares. Or is it maybe
some people use Facebook. I never really got into it in the first place, so I'm not the person to ask.
Yeah, I don't know. And then the course, my book, I have a complimentary digital magazine. It's called Crown and Glory. All of those can be found on CoachCamCourses.com.
All right. Well, I certainly encourage everybody to reach out, connect up with you in any or all of the platforms you're on. And certainly you have a lot of things to share, and you've done a lot of interesting things. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been fun to hear your story. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have an inventive journey of your own to tell, feel free to reach out to us at inventivejourneyguest.com to apply to be as a guest on the podcast. If you're a listener, make sure to click subscribe so you get this notifications and when this episode and all the new episodes go live. And lastly, if you ever need any help with patents or trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Well, Coach Cam, it's been fun to have you on. It's been a fun journey. Wish you the next best leg of your journey. And thank you again.
See you soon.